Yeah, it's definitely like so interesting to think about. And one of the things that like gets brought up a lot when we're talking about like God and evolution and like animal suffering and like people like young earth creationists or like even like people will have this question of like, well, doesn't the fall explain like all like animal suffering? Because this is something for me growing up, I always just like intuitively assumed. I was like, oh yeah, it's the fall. That's why we have animal suffering. But then you look at like modern science and we see just massive amounts of languishing of animals throughout the fossil record. So it seems like the fall may not be able to do that scientifically. Like, how would you generally respond to like people who think that like the fall could give a complete explanation of like the problem of animal suffering?
Yeah. First, I'd ask which fall they're talking about, because if they're wanting to say that human sin brought all of this suffering into the world, you have a big chronological problem, right? So anatomically, modern humans have been around for about 200,000 years, behaviorally modern 50,000 years, you know, but we see animal suffering for hundreds of millions of years in the fossil record. And so how did very, very recent sin cause all of this destruction for people or for animals back then becomes a real problem. And you have some people like William Dembski who are going to say, God retroactively applied the effects of the human fall to the animal world. But it's not a very elegant solution, I think. I think that it raises a lot of questions about the goodness and justice of God in that case. The other option that people often look to is the question of a satanic fall. That, okay, humans weren't around from the beginning, but Satan and the fallen angels were, and they could have disrupted the evolutionary process. So C.S. Lewis famously argues this, and some of my colleagues here, like Michael Lloyd, or some American scholars like Gregory Boyd, argue that. And on the surface, it sounds pretty good, right? God made a good world. It was messed up by Satan, and that's why there's so much violence and pain in the natural world. I think that there are still a few problems with it. First, scripturally, God creates the world with animals and with all humans and is still saying it's good. So if it had been messed up since the very beginning through all the eons of development, you think God might have mentioned it in chapter 1. Yeah. And throughout things like the narratives in Job where God speaks, God's pointing to all the most difficult, problematic, dangerous parts of creation with sort of special pride. Like, have you seen what I've done here? Isn't it amazing? Mm-hmm. So there doesn't seem to be a strong biblical foundation for saying, the whole world is deeply intertwined with Satan's corrupting actions. But scientifically, it gets even more difficult, because what we see in evolution is that the very skills and abilities and values that we hold are intimately tied in to the suffering and the pain and the death. So that would mean if Satan caused the suffering, the pain, and the death, then Satan is also responsible for all the goods, for the strength, the swiftness, for, our intelligence. All of those things are a direct result of competition and elimination and extinction and so on. So you end up really passing the whole of creation over to Satan if you do that. The other thing that science brings is it helps us see that suffering, even death, can actually be very difficult but very good gifts. So I used to think, a life without pain would be really, really great. Like, wouldn't that be awesome? If I didn't feel pain, I'd be Superwoman. But when I went to China earlier in my undergraduate days, we went to a leprosy colony where people had been cured of the ongoing bacterial infection of leprosy, but still were dealing with sort of the after effects of the disease. And what the infection does is it kills your pain nerves. So you can no longer feel things. And that's all it does. It doesn't actually devour skin or anything like that. It simply kills the pain nerves. And then people not being able to feel pain slowly destroy their own bodies. So they will burn themselves and not know. They might break their bones in their foot and keep walking on them. Because they don't feel pain, they can't protect themselves. And so one of the things that's interesting is if Jesus was curing people who had Hansen's disease, what we now call, what used to be called leprosy, it's a bit ambiguous because that word was used for all sorts of skin diseases. But if any of them had Hansen's disease, Jesus's healing was giving them back their ability to feel pain. It wasn't taking pain away. And so I think it's more consistent to see suffering as part of the good and difficult gift that God gives in life. And that, it's the same with love. It's the same with family. It's the same with so many things. And you lose that richness if you're just saying it's all due to the fall.